Right, we're at chapter 3. Nice short chapter, but it took me a while to get through it because there's a lot in it. So we left it with a knock at the door, and it's Tarantyev. Who's Tarantyev? Well, we get 6 pages of description about who Tarantyev is, and it's very, very interesting. So let's break it down. The first thing I wrote was, is Tarantyev the opposite of Oblomov? We've got here a man clearly without a trace of benevolence. He comes from the same village as Oblomov. And we're told, I got into a wee linguistic thing here, we're told what his job is. And Stephen Pearl has got it down as jobber, which made me wonder what that might be. So yeah, his father was one of those old-time provincial jobbers who had intended handing down to his son his skill and experience in the craft of running other people's errands, so that he could follow in his father's nimble footsteps in the corridors of the law courts and other official institutions. So I looked up Magarshack to see how he had translated it, and he's got it down as lawyer, which I think is not quite correct. Then I looked up the Russian, and I came across a word I'd never seen before, podyachi. So this is a kind of old school word, goes back to the 16th to 18th centuries, and it means minor official, a scrivener, clerk, something along those lines. So I ended up going down a bit of a rabbit hole looking up these old words to see what they were, and we get another one, which is kryuchkotvariets, a word I'd never come across before, which seemingly means facilitator in the Stephen Pearl translation. And I wondered if it could have been paralegal, but I don't think that's quite right either. It's somebody who works in the, not the legal profession, but someone who's an assistant. And we get a description of how Tarantyev was brought up by his father to take on this post. He was taught Latin, and before he ever got into post, he ended up being shipped off to be raised elsewhere. Did his father die? Can't even remember. But he ended up not getting the job that he was trained for, and so all of these skills that he had learned while sitting around his dad's meetings, while his dad had colleagues and cronies around, he became manipulative and wise, I don't know, worldly wise. And then we get a description of how his skills, lying dormant, became corrupted somehow, and it describes it as a fairy tale, which I found fascinating. So it explains this is how Tarantyev came to remain nothing but a theorist for the rest of his life, because he doesn't get a chance to use his Latin or to use these skills that he's learned sitting at his father's feet. And it says that these powers within himself, locked in by adverse circumstances, with no prospect of any outlet, in just the same way that in fairy tales, evil spirits were once kept chained to the walls of stifling dungeons by magic spells to keep them out of mischief. Perhaps it was this feeling of blocked potential within himself that made Tarantyev so rude and abrasive in company, and so hostile, aggressive and quick to anger. He had a natural instinct for bribery and corruption. So here's this character, larger than life, who comes into Oblomov's lounge. While, remember, Alexeyev is still there. And we're told here that Oblomov needs these people, which I found fascinating. It says, so we've got these hangers-on, like Tarantyev and Alexeyev, who find rich people to hang on to their coattails and get dragged along. In Alexeyev's point of view, he's not manipulative and taking advantage of Oblomov, whereas Tarantyev definitely is. And it says there are still those idle rich who need to surround themselves with such hangers-on to relieve the tedium of their lives. Who would there be to hand you your snuff box or to pick up your dropped handkerchief? Who would there be to complain to about your headache in the confident expectation of appropriate commiseration? So it seems to me that what Oblomov is lacking here is a wife, someone to love. That's what I've written down here. And then it says his guests needed some reciprocity. So it's talking about the first 3 guests that came around to the door, tried to persuade Oblomov to leave the house and go off to the May Day celebrations, which he refuses to do. And then these guests disappear. But it's the last 2 guests that seem to get something out of being in Oblomov's company, and which Oblomov also gets something, whom Oblomov also gets something from. In their company as someone to pick up his handkerchief and hand the snuff box and talk to about his bad dreams. And then the very last paragraph in the chapter says that there was only one person for whom Oblomov had genuine feeling, and that's Stoltz. So we've yet to meet Stoltz, but they grew up together, we're told, and they lived under the same roof. Andrei Ivanovich Stoltz. He was away, but Oblomov expected him back at any moment. So, yeah, we've not had any dialogue between Tarantyev and Oblomov. That's coming up in chapter 4, so stick around for that. Look forward to seeing how it goes down.